The great hall of Ashcombe Manor smelled of beeswax and cold stone, and the candles along the long table burned in steady rows like small yellow soldiers. Outside, the wind pushed against the tall windows, and the glass rattled in its lead frames. Inside, the fire in the grate popped and hissed as a fresh log settled. The house was old, older than the family who owned it now. And the walls had heard many things over the years. Tonight they would hear one more. In the small servants' passage that ran behind the dining room, a young woman stood very still with a tray in her hands. Her name was Maren Fairley, and she was 26, though most people at Ashcombe thought her younger because she was small and quiet and had a way of moving that did not draw the eye. She wore a plain grey wool gown with a white apron tied twice at the back, and her dark hair was pinned up in a knot that had already begun to slip after 12 hours on her feet. Her hands were red at the knuckles from washing pots that morning, and there was a bit of flour still caught in the cuff of her sleeve. Maren was not a maid, not in the strict sense. She had come to Ashcombe 2 years past as a companion to old Miss Ida Ashcombe, the master's aunt, who had since died in her sleep on a rainy Tuesday. When the morning was done, no one had thought to send Maren away. She had simply stayed on, sliding into whatever work was needed, mending linen, reading to the housekeeper in the evenings, helping in the kitchen when the cook's knees were bad. She was neither above stairs nor below stairs, and she suspected that was why she had not been noticed enough to be dismissed. She was useful, and she was quiet, and in a great house that was a kind of invisibility that could last for years. She could hear voices from the dining room, though she was not supposed to be listening. The tray in her hands held a jug of fresh cream, and she had been told to wait until the second course was cleared before she brought it in. So she stood, and she waited, and she heard. "It is quite past bearing," Lady Prudence Ashcombe was saying, in the sharp, bright voice she used when she meant to wound. The sauce for the pheasant was thin as water, and the pudding tasted of nothing at all. "I do not know what has come over Mrs. Bramble, but she is plainly past her work." Maren felt the small, fine hairs at the back of her neck lift. Mrs. Bramble had been at Ashcombe for 40 years. She had come as a scullery girl when she was 10, and she had risen slow and steady until the kitchens belonged to her, and now she was near 60, with swollen ankles and hands that shook a little in the cold mornings. She loved the house, and the house for the most part loved her back. "She is old, Prudence," said Mr. Silas Ashcombe, in a bored, tired voice. He was Lady Prudence's brother, and the master of the house in all but title, since he managed the estate for their cousin. "Old servants make old food. What can one do?" "One can dismiss her," Lady Prudence said. "One can find a proper French cook, someone who understands sauces. If we are to have his grace under this roof for a full week, we cannot serve him pheasant swimming in dishwater. It shames us. It shames the name." Maren's fingers tightened on the tray. She knew what that word dismissal meant for a woman of Mrs. Bramble's years. It meant a small room in her sister's cottage in the village, if the sister would have her. It meant no pension worth naming, because Lady Prudence would see to it that none was given. It meant sitting by a hearth that was not hers, listening to the rain, waiting to die. The sauce was not thin, Maren whispered to herself, so quietly that only the wallpaper could have heard her. It was proper cream and butter, and I saw it made. She had in fact been in the kitchen that afternoon. She had watched Mrs. Bramble beat the sauce with her wooden spoon, the cook's soft cheeks red from the fire, humming an old country tune under her breath. The sauce had been thick and golden, and it had smelled of good butter and a whisper of nutmeg. Whatever had happened to it between the kitchen and the table, it had not been Mrs. Bramble's doing. The door from the dining room swung open, and Mr. Coombs the butler stepped through into the passage. He was a tall, thin man with white side whiskers and a face that gave away nothing. He nodded once to Maren, and she understood that the moment had come. She lifted her tray and stepped through the door behind him, into the warm, bright, dangerous room. The dining room was long and low, with a heavy oak table down the middle and a fire at the far end that threw a red glow along the sideboard. Silver caught the candlelight and threw it back in bright small stabs. The air smelled of roasted meat and warm wine, and the faint sweet smoke of the beeswax candles. 6 people sat at the table. Maren knew them all. At the head sat Mr. Silas Ashcombe, in a green coat that pulled tight across his stomach. On his right was his sister Lady Prudence, thin and straight, her pale hair dressed high, and her thin mouth painted a soft pink. Beside her sat her 2 grown daughters, Miss Cassia and Miss Delphine, who had come from town for the shooting season and had been bored since the day they arrived. Across from them sat old Mr. Ollery, the neighbour, who was half-deaf and eating with great steady patience. And at the foot of the table, in the chair kept for honoured guests, sat a man Maren had seen only once before. On the day of his arrival, from a window on the upper floor, His Grace, the Duke of Havercroft. She had not looked at him closely then. She looked at him now, because she could not help it, and because she was carrying a jug of cream and had to see where to set it. He was not what she had expected of a duke. He was not old, for one thing. He looked to be a little past 30. He was tall, she could tell that even seated. His shoulders filled the coat he wore, which was dark blue and cut plain. His hair was very dark and cut short, and his jaw was clean-shaven. His eyes were the strange part. They were grey, a pale clear grey, and they did not move the way most eyes moved. They fixed on a thing and stayed. They fixed now on Lady Prudence, who had not stopped talking. "I was just saying to my brother," she said brightly, as if the whole matter of the cook were a light topic and not a life being weighed, "that we shall have to make changes in the kitchen before we can properly entertain. It is a great pity. Our Mrs. Bramble has served long, but her hand has grown heavy." "Has it?" said the Duke. His voice was low and even and gave nothing away. "The sauce tonight, Your Grace," said Lady Prudence, laying her thin hand upon her breast, "was a disgrace. I was mortified." "Mortified? I do hope you did not judge us by it." The Duke did not answer at once. He picked up his glass, turned it a quarter in his fingers, and set it down again. His grey eyes did not leave Lady Prudence's face. "I judged the sauce," he said at last, "to be perfectly correct." There was a small pause. Lady Prudence laughed, a light thin laugh with a scrape in it. "You are too kind, Your Grace. Too kind by half." Maren set the jug of cream down at Mr. Ashcombe's elbow without spilling a drop. Her heart was beating so loud she was sure the whole table could hear it. She turned to go back to the passage. She was almost at the door. "And there was a hair," said Miss Delphine suddenly, in the small bright voice of a girl who has thought of something clever. "In my dish. A grey hair. A cook's hair, I should think. From the head of a very old cook." The 2 sisters laughed together, high and sharp, and the fire popped, and old Mr. Ollery went on chewing, and Lady Prudence smiled the smile of a woman who has just been handed a fresh weapon. "There you see, Your Grace," Lady Prudence said. "A hair. In a lady's dish. It is the end. We shall have Mrs. Bramble packed and gone by the week's end. I only wish we might send her before you leave us, so that your final days here should be worthy of your visit." Maren stopped walking. She stood with her hand on the doorframe. She should have kept going. She knew she should. Every scrap of sense she had ever been given told her to keep going. A servant did not speak in the master's dining room. A servant did not correct a lady. A servant who did so was a servant no longer, and a woman without a place in a great house was a woman with nowhere at all. But she thought of Mrs. Bramble, humming over the butter sauce. She thought of the swollen ankles and the shaking hands and the 40 years. She thought of the sisters' cottage in the village, and the wet cold wait for the end. She turned around. "Forgive me," Maren said. The word came out of her mouth before she had quite decided to speak. It landed in the warm, bright room like a small stone dropped into a still pond. Every head turned. Miss Cassia's spoon paused halfway to her mouth. Old Mr. Ollery blinked and looked around as if he had missed something. Mr. Ashcombe's brows drew down. Lady Prudence's pink mouth went flat. The Duke of Havercroft did not turn his head at once. He turned it slowly. His grey eyes came to rest on Maren, and stayed. "What did you say, girl?" Lady Prudence said. Her voice was ice now, all the light gone out of it. Maren felt the heat rise up her throat, up the back of her neck, into her cheeks. Her hands had begun to shake, but she held them still against her apron. She kept her chin up. She could feel the weight of the Duke's grey gaze on her face, but she did not look at him. She looked at Lady Prudence. "Forgive me, my lady," Maren said again. Her voice was quiet, but it did not tremble. The sauce was made proper today. I saw it. Mrs. Bramble beat it herself. It was thick and good when it left the kitchen, and the hair Miss Delphine found, if she found one, could not have been Mrs. Bramble's. Mrs. Bramble wears a linen cap over her hair whenever she is at the fire. She has done so for 40 years. I have never seen her without it in the kitchen. Never once. The room went silent. It was not the small silence of a pause in talk. It was a deep silence, the kind that presses on the ears. The fire hissed. A candle guttered. Somewhere far off in the house a door shut. The 7 faces at the table were turned to Maren, and not one of them moved. Lady Prudence had gone the colour of chalk under her paint. Miss Delphine's mouth hung a little open. Miss Cassia had put her spoon down. Mr. Ashcombe was staring at Maren as if he had never seen her before in his life, which was perhaps close to the truth, and the Duke was watching her. He had not moved. His hand still rested lightly on the stem of his glass. His face had not changed. But his grey eyes had gone very steady, and Maren felt the weight of them the way one feels the weight of a hand laid on one's shoulder. Lady Prudence found her voice. "You," she said. "You dare." "I beg your pardon," Maren said. She did not step back. "I only meant to say what was true." "What is true," Lady Prudence said, biting down on each word, "is that servants do not speak in this room. What is true is that you have forgotten yourself. What is true is that you will leave this house at first light, and you will consider yourself fortunate that I do not have you thrown out into the rain tonight." "Prudence," said Mr. Ashcombe in a low voice, glancing at the Duke. But Lady Prudence was not to be stopped. Her thin pink mouth had come alive with colour, and her thin hands were flat on the table. "Do you know what you are, girl? You are nothing. You were a companion to a dead woman. You have been eating at our table without earning it for 2 years. And now you stand there in your dirty apron and dare to speak of what is true in my dining room." Maren stood very still. The words landed, one after another, small hot slaps on her face. She did not flinch. She had heard worse said of her, though never so plainly. She had learned long ago that if you did not move, most storms would pass over you. But this one line, the last one, Lady Prudence delivered with the small, cruel smile of a woman who has been saving it. "Perhaps if you had a face worth looking at, we might have found a use for you. As it is, you are only in the way." Maren felt something inside her chest go very cold. She kept her chin up. She did not answer. Enough, the Duke had spoken. He had not raised his voice. He had said the one word quietly, in the same low, even tone he had used before, and yet the whole room seemed to lean toward him as if he had struck the table. Lady Prudence turned to him. Her smile came back, though it was thinner now, and there was a shake at the corner of her mouth. "Your Grace, forgive us. This is a small household matter, quite beneath your notice. I shall have the girl removed at once." "You shall not," said the Duke. The 3 words dropped into the room. Lady Prudence blinked. "Your Grace?" The Duke set his glass down. He rose from his chair. He was even taller standing than Maren had guessed. He did not look at Lady Prudence. He looked across the room, at Maren, and for the first time she saw his eyes clearly, and there was a heat in them that she did not understand. "You will excuse me," he said, still not looking away from Maren. "I find I have no further appetite." He walked around the table. He walked past Mr. Ashcombe, who half rose in confusion. He walked past Miss Delphine, whose mouth was still a little open. He stopped in front of Maren. He was so close that she could smell him, wool and rain, and a faint sharp trace of something like green herbs, and under it all something warmer that she did not have a word for. "Miss," he said, and his voice was gentler than it had been at the table, though not soft. "What is your name?" "Maren, Your Grace," she said. "Maren Fairley." "Miss Fairley," he said, and gave a small formal bow, no more than a dip of the head, but she felt it as if he had knelt. "Would you do me the kindness of walking with me a little way? I find I need air, and I do not know the corridors of this house." Behind him, Lady Prudence made a small strangled sound. Maren looked past the Duke at the table, at the faces that were staring at her as if she had grown a second head. She saw Mrs. Bramble's swollen ankles in her mind. She saw the 40 years. "I will, Your Grace," she said. She set her tray down on the sideboard. She smoothed her apron with hands that had at last stopped shaking. And then, in a silence so complete that the fire sounded like a river, she walked with the Duke of Havercroft out of the dining room, and down the long dim corridor, and toward the door that opened onto the terrace and the wet cold garden beyond. Neither of them spoke until they were out of the house. The Duke opened the tall glass door himself. Cold air rushed in, sharp with the smell of wet grass and old stone. Maren stepped out onto the terrace. The rain had stopped, but the flagstones were slick and shining under the moon. Her breath came out in small white clouds. She wore no shawl. Within a minute her arms had begun to prick with cold. The Duke seemed to see it at once. Without a word he took off his coat, the dark blue one, and settled it about her shoulders. It was heavy and warm and smelled of him. She almost said no, but the coat was already on her, and she thought if she shrugged it off she would look a fool. "Thank you," she said instead. "You are welcome." He clasped his hands behind his back. He was in his shirt sleeves now, and the white linen showed pale in the moonlight. He did not seem to feel the cold at all. "Miss Fairley, may I ask you a question?" "Yes, Your Grace." "How long has that woman spoken to you as she did tonight?" Maren was quiet a moment. She looked out over the low black garden. An owl called from somewhere among the yew hedges. "She has never spoken to me quite like that, Your Grace," she said. "But she has never had a reason before. I have always been careful not to give her one." "Careful," he said. Yes, he looked at her sideways. In the moonlight his grey eyes were almost silver. "That is a great deal of careful for 2 years. She did not answer. "Miss Fairley," the Duke said quietly, "I owe you an apology." She looked at him then, honestly startled. "Your Grace?" "For 8 days," he said, "I have sat at that table. I have eaten every meal Mrs. Bramble sent up. I found each one very good. I said nothing. I let a stranger in the passage do what I ought to have done myself." "You could not have known, Your Grace," Maren said. "You could not have known what the sauce was meant to be." "I knew what a hare in a dish was," he said. His mouth had gone hard. "I have lived under my own roof long enough to know that when a cook is to be dismissed, a hare appears. It is an old trick. I ought to have said so at once. Instead, I sat and turned my glass." Maren did not know what to say. She had never in her life heard a man of his rank admit a fault to a woman of hers. She had in fact been quite sure that men of his rank could not. "I do not think anyone else would have said so, Your Grace," she said at last. "I know that," he said. "That is precisely the trouble." They stood in silence. Somewhere the owl called again. The moon moved a little behind a thin cloud. "Miss Fairley," the Duke said, "what will happen to you tonight if you go back into that house?" Maren thought about it. She thought about Lady Prudence's face. She thought about her small room at the top of the east wing, where there was a bed and a chair and a chest with her few things, a comb, a piece of blue ribbon that had belonged to her mother, 3 books. "I will pack, Your Grace," she said, "and in the morning I will walk down to the village. I have a little money set by. Not much. Enough for a week at the inn. After that I do not know." "I know," said the Duke. She looked at him. "You will not walk to the village in the morning," he said. "I have use for a woman of sense in my own household. My steward's wife has been asking me these 6 months for a companion, a reader, a woman who can manage the linen and speak French to her when the fit is on her. I have put her off because I did not know a suitable person. I know one now." Maren stared. "Your Grace, you cannot mean it." "I mean it. You do not know me. I know that you stood in that passage," he said, "and heard a woman's livelihood spoken of as if it were a joke, and you came into a room full of your betters, in a torn apron, with no defense but the truth, and you spoke." He paused. He was looking at her as if she were a book he was reading very slowly. "I have sat across from ambassadors, Miss Fairley. I have sat across from generals. I have never in my life seen a braver thing done at a dinner table." The heat came up in her cheeks again. She looked down at her hands. The Duke's coat was warm around her shoulders. "I do not know if I have been brave, Your Grace," she said. "I only know I could not let it stand." "That," said the Duke softly, "is precisely what brave people say." He turned back toward the house. He offered her his arm. It was such a small, courtly gesture, and so wildly out of place between a duke and a torn apron, that she almost laughed. "Come inside," he said. "You are cold, and there are matters to settle." She took his arm. His sleeve was fine linen under her fingers. She could feel the warmth of him through the cloth. They walked back across the terrace together. When they came to the door, he opened it for her, and she passed through, and the warm smell of the house closed around her again. Beeswax and old wood and roasted meat and something new now, something that had not been there before, though she could not have named it. Mr. Coombs the butler was waiting in the corridor. His face gave away nothing, as always, but his eyes flicked once to the Duke's coat around Maren's shoulders, and once to the Duke's shirt sleeves, and once back to some invisible spot on the wall. "Coombs," said the Duke, "Your Grace. Miss Fairley will not be leaving Ashcombe in the morning. She will be travelling with my party when I go on Friday next. Please see that she is given a proper room tonight, not whatever cupboard she has been sleeping in, and that a fire is laid there. She has had a long evening." "Very good, Your Grace," said Mr. Coombs and Coombs. "Your Grace. Mrs. Bramble will remain in her place. She will remain there as long as she wishes to remain. When she chooses to retire, she will retire with a pension equal to her 40 years of work. This is not a suggestion. It is a term of my continued visit under this roof. Have I made myself clear?" Something happened in Mr. Coombs's face then that Maren had never seen there before. Something almost like a smile. It was gone as quick as it came. "Perfectly clear, Your Grace," said Mr. Coombs. "Good," said the Duke. He turned back to Maren. "Miss Fairley, sleep well. We shall speak again in the morning." He bowed to her, that same small dip of the head, and he walked away down the corridor toward the stairs. She watched him go. He walked as he did everything else, without hurry, without noise, taking up the space that belonged to him and no more. "Mr. Coombs cleared his throat. "Miss Fairley," he said, "if you will follow me." She followed him. She had forgotten she still wore the Duke's coat. She did not remember it until she was in a room at the front of the house that was 3 times the size of her own, with a fire snapping in a real grate and a soft high bed with clean white sheets, and Mr. Coombs was gone, and she stood in the middle of the strange rich room with the Duke's blue coat around her shoulders and a shake in her hands that had nothing to do with cold. She lifted the coat to her face without meaning to. She breathed in. Wool and rain and green herbs and that warm thing underneath. She closed her eyes. "Steady," she whispered to herself. "Steady, Maren." But her heart did not steady. Not that night. And she lay for a long time in the strange soft bed, listening to the fire, watching the shadows on the ceiling, thinking of a pair of grey eyes that had gone very steady when she spoke. In the morning the house was quiet, in the way houses are quiet after something has broken in the night. The maids moved on tiptoe. Mr. Coombs met Maren in the corridor with a face carefully blank, and told her that breakfast had been set for her in the small parlour. Alone, she ate a little bread and drank a little tea. Her hand was steady on the cup this morning. She was not sure why. She was told gently by Mr. Coombs that Lady Prudence had left the house at first light. She had taken her daughters with her. Mr. Ashcombe had shut himself in his study and had not called for anyone. The kitchen, Mr. Coombs said, with the faintest twitch at the corner of his mouth, was much as usual. Mrs. Bramble was at that moment beating a bowl of eggs. Maren rose from the table and went down to the kitchen. She could not help it. She wanted to see with her own eyes. The kitchen at Ashcombe was a warm, low room, with a great blackened hearth at one end, and a long scrub table in the middle, and copper pots hanging bright along the walls. It smelled always of butter and yeast and coal smoke, and the green sharp smell of chopped herbs. Mrs. Bramble stood at the table now, sleeves rolled to her red elbows, her linen cap tied firm about her grey hair, beating eggs with the slow, steady rhythm of a woman who had beaten eggs every morning of her life. She looked up when Maren came in. She did not say anything for a moment. Her small, watery blue eyes moved over Maren's face. Then she set the bowl down. She wiped her hands on her apron. She came around the table. Maren had thought Mrs. Bramble might weep. Mrs. Bramble did not. She took Maren's 2 hands in her own 2 hands. Her fingers were warm from the eggs and rough from 40 years. "Girl," said Mrs. Bramble, that was all. Just the one word. But it carried the weight of 40 years, and a hearth by a sister's cottage that would not now be needed, and a small dry space at the very back of the eye where tears began. Marin swallowed. I only said what was true, Mrs. Bramble. I know what you said, girl, said Mrs. Bramble. She squeezed Marin's hands. I know what you said. Every soul in this house knows what you said. Coombs told the whole hall at first light. Marin felt her cheeks go hot. I am sorry if I made trouble. Trouble, Mrs. Bramble gave a short, soft laugh that shook her plump shoulders. Girl, trouble is not what you made. You go on now. You go on. And you eat a proper breakfast, do you hear me? You have not eaten a proper breakfast the whole time you have been in this house. I have watched. Marin did not know what to say. Mrs. Bramble let go of her hands, gave her a small firm push on the shoulder, and turned back to her eggs. Marin went slowly up the back stair. She sat on the wide, low sill of the landing window and looked out at the wet garden. The sun had come out. It lay pale gold on the yew hedges. She thought of what Mrs. Bramble had said, that Coombs had told the whole hall at first light. She had not thought about the servants' hall. She had not thought that below stairs would care. She had thought below stairs would only be sorry the master had been made to look a fool. Instead, she gathered. Below stairs was pleased. Deeply, quietly pleased. She sat on the sill for a long time. That afternoon a maid she did not know brought her a note on a small silver tray. The note was written in a hand she did not know either, plain and firm and square. It said only, His Grace requests the pleasure of your company in the library at 3. The maid dipped a small curtsy and went away. At 3, Marin stood outside the library door. She had changed her gown. She wore her second best now, a soft dark green wool, plain but well made, that Miss Ida had given her the winter before she died. Her hair was pinned up neat, and her apron was clean. She did not know why she had bothered with the apron. She was not a servant any longer, she supposed, and yet she was not a lady either, and the apron felt like something to hold to. She knocked. She heard him say, "Come in that same low, even voice. The library at Ashcombe was a long room lined floor to ceiling with old books, most of them unread. A great window at the far end looked out over the park. A fire burned in the grate. The Duke stood by the window with his hands clasped behind his back. He turned when she came in. Miss Fairley. Your Grace. Please sit. He nodded to a chair by the fire. She sat. He did not sit. He came and stood by the mantel, in the daylight without the candlelight to soften him. He looked more tired than he had the night before. There were small lines at the corners of his eyes she had not seen before. He was, she thought, a man who did not sleep much. I have written to the wife of my steward this morning, he said. I have described you. I have told her the position is filled if she wishes to fill it. I expect an answer within 3 days. In the meantime, I have taken the liberty of making certain arrangements for your comfort here at Ashcombe. I hope you will not find them presumptuous. Your Grace, said Marin carefully, may I ask you something? You may. Why? He looked at her a long moment. The fire cracked. Outside a wood pigeon called from somewhere in the beech trees. Why what, he said at last. Why this? Why me? You saw me for perhaps 20 minutes last night. I am not clever, Your Grace. I am not beautiful. I am not, as Lady Prudence took some pains to point out, anyone in particular. There must be 100 women who could sit with your steward's wife. Why go to the trouble? He was quiet a long time. I will tell you, he said, because I think you deserve the honest answer. But I will tell you badly, because I am not a man who talks well of such things. I would rather have a badly told truth, Your Grace, than a well-told falsehood. The very smallest smile touched the corner of his mouth. It was gone almost at once. I was raised, he said, by a woman a great deal like the one you saw last night. My mother. She used the same words. She had the same voice. I learned very young that in a fine house, cruelty wears a pink mouth and a light laugh, and no one calls it what it is. My father did not stop her. My uncles did not stop her. My tutors did not stop her. I did not stop her, because I was 10 years old. He paused. He looked into the fire. When I was a boy, we had a cook. Her name was Mrs. Sedge. She was kind to me when no one else was. When I was 14, she was dismissed. A hair had appeared in a dish. I did not speak up. I knew who had put it there. I did not speak up. Mrs. Sedge went to her sister's cottage in a village. I never saw her again. She died in the second winter. I heard of it a year later by chance. He was still looking at the fire. I have not, he said, very quietly, forgiven myself for that. Maren sat very still. Last night, he said, I sat at that table. I listened to what she said. I did what I did when I was 14. I turned my glass in my fingers. And then a woman I did not know, a woman who had every reason to keep her mouth shut, came into the room and said the words I ought to have said 30 years ago. He turned his head. His grey eyes were on her again. That is why, Miss Fairley, he said. That is why. Maren could not speak for a moment. She looked at her hands in her lap. She had not thought, when she stepped through that door with the jug of cream, that she was stepping into any life but her own small one. She had not thought that anywhere in the room there sat a man carrying the weight of a 14-year-old boy who had not spoken. Thank you, Your Grace, she said at last, very softly, for telling me. Thank you, Miss Fairley, he said, just as softly, for last night. They sat in silence for a while. It was not an uncomfortable silence. She had not sat in a silence like that with a man before, one where nothing needed to be filled. There is one more thing, he said. You should know it. My steward's wife is not fanciful. She is a small woman, sharp as a needle, with a temper. She has read every book in this room and hers besides. She has no patience for softness. I mention this because I do not wish you to arrive imagining you have found some kind of easy retreat. You will be earning your keep. You will be earning it hard. Maren felt something in her lift. That, Your Grace, is a great comfort. He looked at her. Yes, he said, almost to himself. I thought it might be. 3 days went by. The house settled. Lady Prudence did not return. Mr. Ashcombe emerged at last from his study and made a stiff formal apology to the Duke, which the Duke received with perfect coldness and no comment. The maids stopped tiptoeing. Mr. Coombs went about with his face carefully blank and his eyes just faintly bright. Mrs. Bramble sent up sauces that were thick and golden, and the Duke ate 2 helpings of everything and said so. Maren saw the Duke every day, though not for long. He was busy with the affairs that had brought him to Ashcombe in the first place, dull matters of land and rent. But at some point each day their paths crossed. In the corridor. On the stair. In the garden. Once, when she had been sent to cut lavender for the linen cupboard. Each time he stopped. Each time he asked her one question about her day. Each time he listened to the answer as if it mattered. On the 3rd day, in the afternoon, she was in the still room at the back of the house, tying bundles of dried herbs to hang from the beam. The still room smelled of lavender and rosemary and the sharp green scent of thyme. Her hands were sticky with the little bits of leaf. She heard a footstep behind her. She turned. It was not the Duke, it was Mrs. Bramble, in her flower-dusted apron, out of breath from the back stair. Girl, said Mrs. Bramble, come out here. Come see. Maren followed her, wiping her hands on her apron. Mrs. Bramble led her out through the scullery door, into the kitchen yard. The yard was a small square of cobblestones between the kitchen and the outbuildings. A cold, clear sun lay on it. In the middle of the yard stood old Perrin the groom, and beside him, on a long lead, stood a small brown pony. The pony was old and rough-coated, with a soft grey nose and dark liquid eyes. For you, said Mrs. Bramble for me? Maren said. His Grace, said old Perrin, touching his cap. He said the road to Havercroft is long. He said a lady of sense who is to be a companion to the steward's wife ought not to travel on the box of a cart. He said this fellow is quiet as a lamb and would do. He said not to tell you it was from him. He said tell you it came from the stables. Maren stared. She looked at the pony. The pony looked back at her and blew a soft, warm breath through his nose. He said not to tell me, she said. I, said Perrin, and his weathered face broke into a slow grin. He said not to. I am telling you anyway. Mrs. Bramble was watching Maren's face. There is more, girl, she said quietly. He has settled a sum on me. My pension. When I retire. He sent for the lawyer yesterday. It is done. I had not thought to know such peace at my age. He asked me not to say. I am saying anyway. Maren put her sticky hand up to her mouth. She thought of him standing by the mantel in the library, looking into the fire, telling her about a boy of 14 who had not spoken. She thought of a woman named Mrs. Sedge in a village she did not know, dead in the second winter. She thought of a pony in a yard, and a lawyer sent for in secret, and a coat around her shoulders in the cold. He is a good man, she said. She had not meant to say it aloud. It came out anyway. Aye, girl, said Mrs. Bramble softly. He is. That evening, at the small supper in the small parlour. For the Duke had ceased to dine in the great hall since Lady Prudence's departure, Maren sat across from him with a plate of Mrs. Bramble's roast fowl in front of her, and did not know how to begin. He had asked her to sit with him for supper this last week of his visit, so that they might, he said, come to know one another a little before the long ride to Havercroft. She had said yes. Now she looked at him across the small round table, in the soft yellow light of 2 candles, and she could not find her tongue. You have gone very quiet, he said, cutting his meat. I saw the pony today, she said. His hand did not stop moving. He went on cutting his meat, but she thought she saw the very smallest colour come into his cheek. Ah, he said. Paran told me. Paran, he said, was asked not to. Paran said as much. Paran, said the Duke, will hear from me. Please do not scold him, Your Grace. He looked up at her. In the candlelight his grey eyes were almost warm. I shall scold him lightly. Mrs. Bramble told me the other thing too. He set his knife down. I asked her not to. She told me anyway. The women in this house, he said, have a great deal to say for themselves this week. It is a new thing, Your Grace, said Maren, and she was surprised to hear a small laugh in her own voice. I hope you will forgive it. I shall forgive it, he said, and he was not smiling with his mouth, but something was smiling in his face all the same. I shall forgive it a great deal. She looked down at her plate. She turned her fork over in her fingers. She thought, this is the moment when a wise woman lets it be. This is the moment when a wise woman eats her supper and does not push. Your Grace, she said, may I ask you one more badly worded question? You may. The pony. The pension. The room with the fire. The seat at your own supper table. She looked up at him. Am I to understand what I think I am to understand? She thought that would be the moment his face would close, the moment he would grow cold and formal again, the moment she would find she had been a fool. He did not grow cold. He did not close. He set both his hands flat on the table on either side of his plate. He looked at her steadily. Miss Fairley, he said, I am not a young man. I have been married to my work these 15 years. I have not, in my life, given much thought to what I might want for myself in the way of a wife. I did not come to Ashcombe with any thought of it. I came, in fact, resolved against it, because I was quite sure that any woman who might be produced for my inspection in a house like this would be a woman like Lady Prudence, and I would sooner ride into the sea. Maren did not move. Then last night, he said, a woman in a torn apron came into my dining room and said what was true. And I sat there with my hand on my glass, and I understood, in a very clear and very quiet way, that I had spent 30 years looking for a person I did not know how to name, and that I had at last, by an accident of a jug of cream, found her. Maren's heart had begun to beat very loud again. She could hear it in her ears. I do not, he said, ask you anything tonight. I do not ask you to answer. You have known me a week. You have every reason in the world to be careful of me. I have arranged the position with my steward's wife, because it is a good position, and because I meant every word about it. You will go to Havercroft. You will earn your keep. You will meet me sometimes in the corridor, and sometimes in the library, and sometimes in the garden, and in a year, or 2 or 3, if you find that the man you have come to know is a man you can bear to sit across from at supper for the rest of your life, you will tell me. And if you find he is not, you will tell me that, and I shall not ask again. He picked up his knife again. He cut a piece of his meat. His hand, she saw, was not quite steady. "I hope," he said, "I have not now made you regret every kindness you did me by speaking last night." Maren was silent a long moment. She looked at the small dish of green peas between them. She looked at the 2 candles. She looked at his hand on the knife. At the small tremor she was sure only she could see. "Your Grace," she said. "Yes, I do not need a year." He looked up. "I do not," she said, "need 2 years. I do not need 3. Her voice was very quiet. Her hands under the table were shaking. She kept them under the table. She kept her voice steady. "I will go to Havercroft. I will earn my keep. I will meet you in the corridor, and in the library, and in the garden. But not because I do not know my mind. I will go because I would like a little time to be a person in your house, before I am anything more to you, so that when I sit down across from you again, at another supper, in another room, I am sitting there because I chose it, and not because I was rescued by it. Can you understand that?" The Duke was very still, and then, slowly, he set his knife down. He put both his hands flat on the table again. He looked at her, and there was something in his grey eyes that she had not seen in any man's eyes in her whole life, a kind of grave, still gladness. "I can understand that," he said. "I can understand that very well. Thank you, Your Grace. Miss Fairley." "Yes, Your Grace. I think, when we are alone, you might call me Rothan." She let out a small breath. It was almost a laugh. "That is a great deal, Your Grace. It is my name. It is a great deal for a first supper." Then perhaps at the second, he said, and the smile was in his mouth this time, small and rare and real. "Or the third. There is no hurry." "No, Your Grace," said Maren. "There is no hurry." They ate their supper. They talked, a little, of small things, of the pony whom she had already named Barley, of the road to Havercroft and how many days it would take, of the wife of the steward, whose name was Mrs. Nettlefold, and who did not, the Duke said gravely, suffer fools, of Mrs. Bramble, who was at that very moment in the kitchen, humming, when Maren went up to her room that night. She stood by the window a long time. The moon was out again. It lay silver on the yew hedges. Somewhere the owl called. She thought of a boy of 14 who had not spoken. She thought of a woman named Mrs. Sedge who had died in a second winter. She thought of the moment she had turned around in the corridor, jug of cream on her tray, and had come back through the door. She had known, when she turned around, only that she could not let it stand. She had not known she would be heard by anyone but Lady Prudence. She had not known that at the foot of the long oak table sat a man who had been listening, all his life, for a woman who would say what was true. She had not known. But she had come back through the door anyway. That, she thought, was the whole of it. The morning came grey and cold, and by mid-morning the Duke's party was assembled in the drive. Horses stamped and blew clouds of white breath. Trunks were roped to a wagon. Old Perrin had the pony Barley bridled and saddled, and was walking him gently in a circle to keep him warm. Mrs. Bramble had come to the kitchen door in her apron and her linen cap and her red hands folded in front of her. And she was pretending not to cry, and she was crying. Mr. Coombs stood at the top of the front steps with his hands behind his back and his face perfectly blank and his eyes very bright. Maren wore her second-best gown, the dark green one, with her cloak fastened at the throat and a small canvas bag over her shoulder with her few things inside. The pony Barley pushed his soft grey nose against her hand and blew a warm breath into her palm. The Duke came down the steps. He was in a dark travel coat, plain and well cut. His hair was uncovered. He nodded once to Mr. Coombs. "Coombs, Your Grace." "Look after them, Your Grace." "Mrs. Bramble, Your Grace," said Mrs. Bramble, and she dipped a small stiff curtsy, and her eyes filled up all over again. "Thank you," said the Duke, "for a week of very good suppers." "Your Grace," said Mrs. Bramble, and then, because she could not help herself, "You take care of our girl." "I shall," said the Duke gravely. "I promise it." He came to Maren. He held out his hand to help her onto the pony. She took it. His fingers closed around hers, warm and steady and strong. He did not let go at once. He helped her settle in the saddle. He adjusted the stirrup for her. He stepped back. "Ready, Miss Fairley?" he said. "Ready, Your Grace," she said. He swung himself up onto his own horse in one easy motion. He nodded to the men. The wagon creaked. The horses moved. Marin looked back once at the great grey face of Ashcombe Manor, at the tall windows and the mossy stones, and the small figure of Mrs. Bramble at the kitchen door. Waving, she raised her own hand. Mrs. Bramble waved harder. Then she turned forward. The lane wound away between the beech trees. The wind smelled of wet earth and coming rain. Barley's hooves made a soft clop-clop on the wet gravel. Beside her the Duke rode easy in the saddle, his grey eyes on the road ahead. His mouth quiet at the corner in that small, rare, almost smile she was beginning to know. They did not speak for a long while. They did not need to. At the top of the lane, where the road turned toward the wide grey country and the long ride north, the Duke drew his horse in for a moment. He looked back over his shoulder at the house one last time. Then he looked at her. "Miss Fairley," he said. "Your Grace, I am glad you turned around." She thought of the jug of cream. She thought of the doorway. She thought of a room that had gone silent. "So am I, Your Grace," she said. "So am I." They rode on together into the pale, cold morning, and behind them the old house stood warm at last in its own kitchen, and somewhere inside a woman in a linen cap was humming over a bowl of butter and the sauce. That day, and every day after, was thick and golden and made proper, because in a fine great house a small brave word, spoken plain and at the right moment, can be the whole of a mercy and the beginning of a life.